Our first YouTube lecture, here's some background and some explanations of Freire's main ideas, and education is revolution. So here's what you need to know about Freire in one sentence. Real education is revolutionary and means empowering others to explain to you why you're wrong. To unpack this simple but not simplistic ideology, consider these 3 points. 1. The banking concept of education is where the teacher's task is to fill students with the contents of their narration, contents which are detached from reality, disconnected from the totality that engendered them, and could give them significance. Words are emptied of their concreteness and become a hollow, alienated, and alienating verbosity. It's about using education to authoritatively tell people the answers rather than helping them learn and learn how to learn. So let's not do that. My second point is Freire's use of the dialectic. According to Google, and never do this, the definition of a dialectic is the art of investigating or discussing the truth of opinions, or inquiry into metaphysical contradictions and their solutions. See? That second definition might as well just mean thinking. Here's a way better one. We don't talk to talk. We don't talk because we think we're the most important snowflakes in the world. We talk to learn because how you talk and how you listen directly impact how you learn. For Freire, the dialectic is about liberation, which is only possible through reflective participation and action. Freire states that, for the oppressed at a certain point in their existential experience, to be is not to resemble the oppressor, but to be under him, to depend on him. Because of this, Freire argues that no pedagogy which is truly liberating can remain distanced from the oppressed by treating them as unfortunates and by presenting for their emulation models from among the oppressors. Freire's theories are rooted in teaching people to learn, not to reproduce. This can only be accomplished through dialectic. You cannot teach freedom. All you can do is help others learn the process of forging a path and thereby forge yourself a new path with them. Because of this, to substitute monologue, slogans, and communiques for dialogue is to attempt to liberate the oppressed with the instruments of domestication. Dialectic is learning to think about your thinking, and, as Freire tells us, reflection, true reflection, leads to action. On the other hand, when the situation calls for action, that action will constitute an authentic praxis only if its consequences become the object of critical reflection. So you have to act, you have to think, and then you have to act again, and then you have to think about how you're acting. But all of this comes down to agency, the power to do something, and agency is power. And say it with me now, kids. With great power, yada yada, yeah, I learned my philosophy from comic books and no, I won't apologize for it. But power is way less fun in reality than theory. Which brings us to my final point, fear of freedom. In his foreword, Richard Schall states, fear of freedom, of which its possessor is not necessarily aware, makes him see ghosts. Such an individual is actually taking refuge in an attempt to achieve security, which he or she prefers to the risks of liberty. Freedom is a complicated and debated philosophical concept, but unfortunately, thanks to U.S. nationalism, it's also become something of a joke. I mean, yeah, it's funny, but also, sigh. There are a lot of consequences to these kinds of jokes, not the least of which is the perversion of our understanding of the concept, but also the assumption that freedom is a state of being rather than a process. Freedom carries with it real risk, as does any revolutionary act. And this fear is not one-sided. As Freire states, the oppressed are afraid to embrace freedom. The oppressors are afraid of losing the freedom to oppress. You can call it Plato's The Cave, or you can call it The Matrix, or you can call it Derrida's There's No Outside the Text. You can call it a lot of things, and we have, but what matters here is we are formed and form ourselves from the context within which we grow. Dipping into postmodernism and social constructivism for just a hot second. If you're resistant to the idea that you have been worked on by the world, please consider A, behavioral modification due to the environmental circumstances is not really up for debate, and B, why are you afraid of recognizing where and how and why you weren't free if it means achieving freedom? This is another lecture outside the purview of my scope here, but as Freire states, the world and human beings do not exist apart from each other. They exist in constant interaction. And now our big finale. Learning is uncomfortable, and if it's not, you're doing it wrong. Incoming text block in 3, 2, 1. Donaldo Macedo writes in his introduction to the 30th edition of Pedagogy of the Oppressed that Paulo Freire's invigorating critique of the dominant banking model of education leads to his democratic proposals of problem-posing education, where men and women develop the power to perceive critically the way they exist in the world, with which and in which they find themselves. They come to see the world not as a static reality, but as a reality in the process of transformation. This offered to me and all of those who experience subordination through an imposed assimilation policy, a path through which we come to understand what it means to come to cultural voice. And here's the important part. It's a process that always involves pain and hope. This is why we tell and reflect on personal stories. It isn't about telling them, it's about reflecting on them, using them as moments for critical intervention of our own thoughts and viewpoints. Masato's points here are that everybody already knows a lot of stuff, and that stuff is rooted in its own world, complete with a history, an existence, and a conception of the future. Dialoguing with one another means acknowledging that and working with it. If what you want is true dialectic, then you can't just tell people what to do. After all, you don't necessarily know where it is they, or you, need to go. You can't test for any of this. It doesn't fit nicely onto an SAT exam, and it means giving up control as educators. It means maybe students don't learn anything. It means a lot of things that directly contradict everything we've been taught by the very system we work within. And they make it look so easy in the movies. Ugh, I can smell all the motivational ink on that Robert Frost picture. And in conclusion, if you want to change the world, you have to change what it means to be educated. The humanities, the liberal arts, science is inquiry-based, not simply memorization. We need them all. And when you start demanding that educators produce students with job skills, what you're actually asking is that we continue the banking model of education. Because otherwise, they might start asking for things like vacation time, a living wage, or health care. People who know their people are dangerous workers.